Hello and welcome everybody to our fourth Aardvark Accessibility Podcast. Today joining me is Natalie.
Hi, Natalie.
And my name is Natalie. Hi, Natalie.
Natalie and Natalie.
So we got the two Natalies joined up again, and in today's episode, we're going to discuss WCAG audits, or website audits in general, right? So last week we talked about the whole auditing accessibility process, and one of those parts was getting the audit done. So, Natalie, go ahead and kick us off. What are the different types of audits out there?
Okay, so if you're in the United States and doing business with the government, then you have Section 508. Section 508 is the 508th section of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, I think. And you might be thinking, there weren't any websites in 1973. What are you talking about? But Section 508, or the Rehabilitation Act in general, is just a law saying any technology used by the federal government has to be accessible, and the exact rules for what that means is set up separately as a regulation by the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice is constantly adjusting those rules, and obviously once websites became a thing, they added those to the list, and there are now requirements around websites that they must be accessible. The Department of Justice has a page you can go to and learn about that. It does require all websites for businesses that companies that do business with the public have to be WCAG AA compliant, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you are building a website for the federal government or a website to be used by the federal government, it will need to be Section 508 compliant. And so you would need to do an audit to make sure that you are meeting those Section 508 rules. And that is called a trusted tester audit. And it can be done only by people who hold a trusted tester certification from the federal government. We also have a bunch of laws tied to specific WCAG versions. So, like I said, the Department of Justice has said what we mean is WCAG AA. That is true of most other accessibility laws around the world, that they all refer back to WCAG AA or something roughly equivalent to it. And WCAG, of course, has several versions that are currently in play, 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2. They are all very similar. They all share the same set of success criteria, but 2.1 adds a few more, and then 2.2 adds a few more. And so you would just need to know, I think currently US law is still using 2.1, and I think that's the case for a lot of international laws too, but they should start using 2.2 very soon. I would expect by 2025. Most governments are going to switch to WCAG 2.2. And then WCAG has 3 levels of compliance: A, AA, and AAA. A is the bare minimum that you can do to say your website is accessible. AAA is the most you can do to make sure your website is accessible. Well, that's not even actually true, because there's still best practices you can do on top of it. But according to the guidelines anyway, to meet the highest level of guidelines, it's AAA. But as I mentioned, most laws refer to AA. Even the WAI, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative, who writes the WCAG standard, even they don't recommend that you try to build a website that's AAA compliant. It's just too difficult and too expensive, too time consuming for most cases. However, what you can do is build it to be AA compliant and then take just the parts of AAA that you think are maybe especially important to your own audience and implement those. And then we also have, if you're in the EU, we have the EU equivalent of Section 508, which was EN 301549. And I don't know if there is a certain way that people say that law. So it could be pronounced another way or whatever. But that is basically the law for the EU. Any websites that happen for any of the governments and anything associated with the European Union itself would need to be compliant with that law, which is, again, like roughly equivalent to WCAG AA. And then probably coming in last place, the last one we'll talk about is what is commonly called a VPAT. So you probably have heard of a VPAT. It stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And that template part is important because the report that you actually create is not a VPAT. VPAT is just the template you use to make the report. Once you have actually filled it all in and reported all the information, it's actually an ACR, which is an accessibility compliance report. But nobody calls it that. Everyone just calls it a VPAT. And there are several different versions of VPAT. So there is one that is specifically for Section 508. There's one that is specifically for WCAG, WCAG 2.0, WCAG 2.1, 2.2. And I think there is also one for EN 301549. So whichever one you need to be compliant with, you can download the template and then you fill it in. And it just goes through line by line. Does your website comply with this rule? Does it comply with that rule? And you can say it does comply, it doesn't comply, or it partially complies, or it's not applicable. So, for example, some of the rules around requiring captions for video, if you don't have any videos, that rule is just not applicable. It's a lot.
You take a breath. It is a lot. I guess, do you want to go through a speed round of questions?
Yeah.
I have a few.
Okay, ask me questions.
For Section 508, this also applies to government and state and county websites.
Yes, yeah. It applies also to any organizations that receive federal funding, which would include public schools at all levels, from kindergarten to college.
Wow, even so, universities, state-funded universities too.
Yes. And even a lot of private universities receive at least some federal funding, and it would apply to them as well.
For Section 508, you mentioned you have to be a certified tester. Is that true for all the other audits you listed?
No, it is not. It is only for Section 508. And for Section 508, it is only true if you are actually performing the audit for a federal government entity. So if somebody just wanted a Section 508 audit on their website, you don't have to have that certification to do it. But if you are going to do it, if you're going to audit the Department of Justice's website, for example, you would have to have your trusted tester certification, which you get from the Department of Homeland Security.
Fun. Don't you love the U.S. Department system?
Yeah. Why it's Homeland Security, I don't know. I actually saw that came up as a discussion in one of the accessibility communities I belong to recently, where somebody was like, why is it Homeland Security? And no one really knows.
They want to secure the experience of their homeland.
I guess.
God. The technical website experience of their homeland.
Maybe.
Mystery solved. So we have all these audits. How often do you have to get them done?
Oh, well, that will depend on how often you are changing your website. If you change it a lot, you might want to do an audit every 6 months. If you don't change it very often, maybe more like once a year would be a good time for you. But it really just depends on how often you're changing content around.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this explains why the government never updates their websites?
It might be a tiny 1% part of the explanation.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't think that's a good enough answer. 1% is not. Right. And then let's see. So we have the European Union and the US, but there's more across the world.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of countries that have accessibility laws. I know Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, like all around the world, countries have accessibility laws.
Thank you. And maybe one last question that I forgot as I was saying that. I'm searching my brain.
Well, one thing we could talk about is what is the difference between an audit and a VPAT?
Okay, let me ask you as if I said that. What's the difference between an audit and a VPAT?
Well, that's a good point, Natalie. I didn't really explain that very well. So, a VPAT or an ACR, if we want to be technically correct, is just a report that you would provide to people that gives an idea of the state of accessibility of your product. Whereas normally, if you were going to have like a WCAG, if you just wanted to say, hey, can you check my website? Is it accessible or is it compliant with WCAG 2.1 AA? Normally, that report would just go to you, and maybe you would share it with your web developer so they could fix some of those issues. A VPAT is actually meant for you to share with other people. So if you make a piece of software and the federal government is interested in buying it from you, they will ask, can we see your VPAT? They have to do that as part of their procurement process. It's that same law that Section 508 comes from, requires them to make sure that when they are procuring technology, that it is accessible. So they will ask for that. And then sometimes other organizations might ask for it as well, as just because they want a statement about how accessible is your product. So it is a report that is meant to be shared with other people and or maybe even posted publicly to be downloaded from your website for anybody who might be curious.
It's a receipt.
Yeah.
Saying their due diligence.
Yeah, we did our due diligence. And the VPAT includes who did the testing, how the testing was done, like which operating systems, which browsers, which assistive technology you used, and the date that it was done. So that's all part of that report as well. So you can see if it's recent and up to date.
Does anybody check the VPAT for accuracy?
That is the job of the person who does it.
So somebody could be giving out fake VPATs.
Hopefully they wouldn't do that. But they could. I'm sure that there are lots of companies out there that are not on the up and up who just fill out their VPAT and just say supports all the way down.
Interesting.
But they could get in trouble if somebody found out they had done that.
With the law?
Yeah, because if they're going to sell that software to somebody, right, they're going to sign a contract, and that VPAT being correct is going to be part of that contract, right? So just like anything else, you say, oh yeah, I certify this is true to the best of my knowledge, this is true. And you could breach the contract if your VPAT isn't accurate.
And they can prove you smudged it.
Well, if there's an obvious accessibility error on the page that or in the software that is not listed in the VPAT, yes.
All right, I remembered my question too.
Okay.
So, just for the US viewers, what laws are in place right now for getting your audits?
So as far as a law requiring an audit, there really isn't one, but there are laws that require accessibility. And kind of one of the only ways to know for sure that your website is fully accessible is to have somebody audit it and check through every page and every part of it to make sure that it's accessible. So we do have the ruling from the Department of Justice as of last year that if you do business with the public, you do need to meet WCAG AA 2.1 AA compliance. There are a handful of states and counties that have additional laws, but they are mostly using WCAG 2.1 AA. And California is currently fighting over a law. I don't know if it will pass or not, that would require all websites to be audited before they were launched to the public by somebody who had a certification.
That is a lot of websites to sift through.
It sure is. Which is why they're still fighting about the law. They haven't really. They have good intentions with that law. I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but I think they're not thinking through the reality of suddenly millions of websites needing to have an audit by someone who is certified, and there's only so many people who are certified, and it's going to create a logistical nightmare, I think, and also a pretty significant cost for a lot of very small businesses.
Well, Natalie, I think we're out of time here, but where can we get started on all this auditing and all this accessibility stuff?
At aardvarkaccessibility.com. You can sign up for free, try out your homepage, see what kinds of accessibility issues are on your homepage, and get some guidance on how to fix them.
Thank you very much. Well, viewers, that's about it. Thank you for joining us for the 4th episode of the Aardvark Accessibility Podcast, where we went over audits. Go get your homepage checked out on aardvarkaccessibility.com. And now it's for the special segment of our video where we pose. And we've chosen a pose beforehand.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Now it's time for the extra pose.
Oh, there's an extra one? I'm always so unprepared.
Natalie, there's an
I'm
extra
always
pose
so
every single
unprepared.
video.
Oh, is it very dramatic?
Yeah. Oh. And that's it.